Oh, okay.
So take two for the RSci update and walkthrough. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Greg, Osdick, and team.
Great. Thanks everybody for coming. The goal of this is really just to give everybody a sort of early view or a sneak peek of what will be available in this field season from the OurSci platform. It's mostly about data collection and management, and we've made a lot of updates based on our learning from this last year through Open Team and through other partners. So that's the goal. So you go to the next slide. What we really want to make sure everybody comes away with is to understand the functionality that we're adding, and a little bit of the why, but mostly just looking at the functionality, because there's a lot. Having a sense of the timeline. I know that different people have different rollouts for this year. It's going to be heavily affected by coronavirus. So, understanding when we'll be ready, and then hopefully at the end getting some feedback on some of these changes and features that we've added, especially as it relates to our existing RFC partners that we worked with last year. So, next. So just some quick background about us. This is our core mission. We really want to support research capacity in communities. It could be non-scientist communities, it could be scientist communities, but communities who are trying to solve hard problems by collecting data from a lot of different sources. Hundreds of people, lots of different types of surveys, lots of different types of data. That's where we feel like we do well, and that's where we've really built our software around. Next slide. And in the context of the Open Team effort, we've been working on the Research Farm Roadmap, which is kind of a subset, really trying to make sure that, what's here says every farm to be able to be a research farm. It doesn't mean everyone has to do research. It just means that we're trying to collect comparable, validatable, scientific quality data at the farm level and farm management level, so that multiple farms can be compared relatively easy, so that research projects aren't constantly starting from scratch. And there's benefits to the researcher and benefits to the farmer. So our sort of design thoughts and goals within the context of the Research Farm Roadmap are these things, 6 things on the bottom. So, and we really feel like if we can nail each of these, then we're going to be able to hit that big goal of making every farm a research farm. And one is design comparably. And that, I think, is one of the hardest things to do. Make sure that my questions, the data I'm collecting, is going to be similar to the data that somebody else is collecting from the get-go, because everything then down the line becomes easy. So if we can help and support users to design comparably, that will make everything later easy. Collect flexibly. Every project is different. Everyone's needs are different. You can't put people into silos. You can't put projects into silos. You have to give them lots and lots and lots of tools to do exactly what they need to do. Store appropriately. We have a database where we store data collected through OurSci surveys. It's not appropriate storage for farm management information. Maybe if you're doing a one-off project it is, but we want to make sure that that whatever data you're collecting through our collection app, you can put it where you want to put it, whether that's FarmOS, whether that's Land PKS, or Open Land Map, or somebody else. Then share, I say eventually, because a lot of research projects don't want to share right away. They want to publish a paper, but it's important that sharing is the default, and you can delay it, but that it gets done effectively. There's a lot of ways to incentivize sharing and making that easy. I think you'll see some of those things as we walk through features today. Learn locally. That means making sure that the project that people are working on, everybody in the project can learn what they need to learn as soon as the data is available to learn it. And so we have dashboards and things like that to make data available quickly in real time. And then if you do that well, and you do all of these things well, you make comparable data design from the get-go, you store things in the appropriate place, you allow people to learn quickly in real time in individual projects, then that last thing, which is all of our big goal, to learn at a global scale across projects with comparable data, it becomes possible. So that's really like, you can't, if you don't do the first 5, you can't get the last one. And that's kind of our big goal. So hopefully that you'll see these items come up again and again in some of the features we walk through. So I wanted to walk through it in detail. Just like 1 minute about our background. We have been working on survey tools for a long time, both me and Dan Travis and Manuel especially, for about 8 years, starting with PhotoSync, which was a project where we made a handheld tool for measuring photosynthesis. It's now at 1.5 million measurements across the globe, 6,000 projects. It's really grown, and we're not part of it anymore, but we did a lot of the early work to make it get to where it was. And we learned a lot about survey collection, about how people organize their research projects, about how to connect to hardware using Android and other things. And then in 2016, we created OurSci, and a lot of similar mission. We wanted to support communities, but we didn't want to be so focused on photosynthesis. We just wanted to support communities and their needs, their data collection and management needs. So over the last couple of years, we've been working with Real Food Campaign, the Bionutrient Food Association, a lot, General Mills, Quick Carbon. So our device, and then the back end, the software back end is what gets used in Quick Carbon, and then obviously with Open Team. The limitation with that piece of software is that it's Android only. And that's been the big lesson learned from last year. But just to give you a sense, if you go to the next slide, that hopefully that motivates. We just think we nerd out like there is no tomorrow about surveys. I mean, that's just, I wouldn't have said that at 39 I would be like a survey nerd, but that is where we've ended up. And it is that way because there's just a real need to do it well, and we're really just trying to do it well. So next slide. So there's a lot here, but the goal here is to give you a sense of the features and when those features will be available for the 2020 season, and to also look back at what other like free functionality exists in the world that can do similar things, and why is it that we need some of this additional functionality. So starting at the top of the list, it says cross-platform. That's the #1 thing we learned. If you look OurSci app version 1, that's what we're using right now. That's our current app that collects and manages data, survey type data. The big thing we learned from last year is if you don't meet people where they're at on the device they're at, they're going to struggle. So if you go to the next slide, Manuel, Dan shared this with me. So this is the Real Food Campaign. The left-hand graph shows non-native Android users. So these are people who had Android devices and collected the data on an Android. And you can see and we had weekly surveys. These are weekly management surveys. So these are farmers collecting weekly surveys about management data. And they were supposed to do it every week. So the blue is people who filled out many, so more than 3 throughout the year, weekly surveys. Few weeklies means 1 to 3 weekly surveys. And then the gray means they didn't fill out any, and we just had to go back at the end of the season, do the best that we could. So native Android users, about 75% did okay. Non-native Android users, it was about 45%. So that made a huge difference. That was a 30% difference. And these non-native Android users, we sent them Android devices. So we literally shipped them all devices. But it's a real struggle for people to use technology that they're not used to, even if you help them through it. So I'm just giving you a little bit of motivation about where we were at. So if you go back 1 slide. So cross-platform was a focus. So this next version is fully cross-platform. You can use it on anything that has a browser. And also you'll be able to send links through email in the same way you can with Google Forms, and then they can fill it out through email as well. Group sharing and rights management. It's something that we had groups in the old version. In the new version, we'll have groups and subgroups. I'm going to walk through that in a little bit. Basically, if you do groups effectively, organizations effectively, then all of your rights management down the line, meaning who can see what data is private, who can submit to what organizations, all that stuff works. But if you don't have organizations in place, it's really hard to do effective data rights management down the line. So we'll look at some of that. connecting to hardware. So that means, can I have a survey where I'm connecting to a Bluetooth connected device to get some sensor data? That's something that's really unique to our platform. We won't have it ready in the new version in March, but we will have it hopefully by the end of the year. But it's something we use a lot right now in the current version. The survey builder tool. This was probably the primary issue that prevented people from using the previous app, besides it being cross-platform. We used Open Data Kit's generic survey builder, which is web-based. It's nice, but it's clunky, and it did not integrate well into the service. It made it hard. And so we've built a fully integrated survey builder tool in the new app, which we'll show today. And really, like, if you look at this list, Google Forms is great because it's cross-platform and there's an easy survey builder tool. Like, that is the key. You know, if you do those things well, then people will want to use it. All the rest of the stuff is kind of gravy. So, and then there's a bunch of other features I'll go through quickly. Share codes. If you have someone who's not on the platform that you want to share data with, like you collected data from a farmer and they want their results back, you don't want to have them to have to go sign up for a service that they're never going to use. You want them to be able to send a link. That link has their data in it, and they're done. So that's a feature that we have. Having complex survey logic, not just if-then statements, like if you answered A here, then I'm going to give you these questions. If you answered B, I'm going to give you those. But really, in the new app, we'll have a much more full-featured version of that. Dashboarding scripts for displaying your results and data, both cleaning it up, which anybody who does data management knows that that's 80% of the job, and then also just visualizing it. Survey scripts is something that's unique to the platform. It means that in a survey, you can write a bit of JavaScript to do something. You could error check. You could go call an API and get information to provide to the user. And we'll show a little bit of that too. API to access data from other services. I just kind of described that, but you'll see it later. FarmOS integration, this is super exciting. So Mike got an aggregator instance for us up, which means that essentially we can manage a large number of individually controlled FarmOS instances. So a farmer can have a FarmOS instance, sign up in OurSci, put in their FarmOS key, and that allows us to push and pull from their FarmOS instance, which means we can give them sort of a tailored experience for data input. And then we can also help visualize their data and compare it to a wide range of FarmOS instances at the same time. So we're super excited about the FarmOS integration piece, and it should be pretty seamless. And then finally, white labeling. So a lot of the large research projects that we work with, or groups, they want to use the functionality, but they want to put on their logo and their color scheme, or they want to have some unique screens at the beginning of the app so that people feel like they're entering into, they understand more about what they're about to do. So that's something else that we have in place that we'll be using with the Real Food campaign first, but will be available generally. So this is not an extensive list of features. This is some of the features, but some of the big ones that people have talked to us about, or we've talked to partners in the in Open Team about before. So go forward. Is there any questions? Because that's like a really detailed one. We're going to go through and we're actually going to use the survey builder tool, but I just want to make sure that was clear for if anybody had any questions. I'll give you like 3 seconds. Okay, go to the next one, Manuel. So this is just a restatement of where we feel like we can provide a lot of value in these kind of situations. So next. Okay, so now I want to walk through what an example use case for the tools that we built out are, and then we're going to go actually like look at a survey that we built, look at some scripts, what do they do, and that kind of stuff. So hopefully this part will take about 5 minutes, and the next will take about 10, and then we'll have time for questions. So I'm just going to use the Real Food campaign. They're a big project with a lot of stakeholders, a lot of different people submitting data from different locations. They have samples that they sent to a lab. So they have data from the lab in the field. So they're an interesting use case. It's not going to be exactly like what you would experience, but I think it should have enough detail in there that you can see where you might fit if you're a similar group. So the RFC, let's say, and this isn't exactly perfect, the RFC either, I'm simplifying it a little. But the RFC organization has two components. It has a lab component where soil samples are coming in to be tested. And then it has a field component. And that is, let's say, auditors going out to farms, collecting farm management data from that farm, collecting soil samples from that farm, and then sending the soil sample to the lab. So that's the basic structure. So go to the next. So here's our users. Within the RFC, we have the sort of RFC admins. They're the ones who are creating the surveys. They're the ones responsible for answering the big questions that the RFC is interested in. In the case of the RFC, it's about understanding connections between farm management, soil health, and food quality. So they're responsible for doing that. They obviously want to make sure there's minimal errors because they're going to have to compile this data. And if it's a mess, it's going to take them forever. So that's them. They're the analyzers. And then in the field, there's going to be an auditor, and that's somebody who's probably not full-time. They know some about the project. They may not know everything, but they're very focused. Their job is to go to the farmer, have them answer a bunch of questions, and then send it off. Then there's usually someone who sits in between, and their job is to manage a series of people like John. So they're like a manager. Nori has some of these people, some farm manager or data manager types that are managing several farms. And what they want to know is they're not looking at an individual survey. They want to know, okay, I got 15 auditors. Are they all keeping up to date? Are we hitting our targets? When they sent a sample to the lab, I see that it got sent, but I don't know if it actually got received. What happened to that sample? How do I track down this messed up ID? That's what Jane, that's her job, is to like figure out what the heck is going on and making sure that we're staying on track. And then in the lab, we've got Tom, right? He's the lab manager. All he does is 1,000 of the 100 soil samples come in a week, and he has just got to try to get them all done as fast as he can. So these are our users. But of course, they're not the only users. If you go to the next slide, there's a little bit more. Thought that was complex enough. Actually, John, of course, is auditing a farmer, right? So Susan's the farmer. What does she want? She really just wants her results, right? Like somebody took a soil sample, she'd like to know what her soil information is. She just wants the results back. Now, maybe she just wants to know it, and maybe she wants to put it in a farm management system. That's also possible. So John's responsible to her. At the same time, probably we want John to collect weather and soil information about the points he's sampling from. If we have that, we'll probably make better predictions later, and we can make more interesting models. We could take it in real time with John, or we could try to take it continuously at the server level and then compare there, but that becomes complicated because you don't necessarily know where John's going to go. So now you got to sync the entire world soil and weather database to figure it out. Anyway, there's choices there, but we got to get the information. And then finally, Tom in the lab, he's got a bunch of lab equipment, and it doesn't magically output what you want. Some of it outputs CSV, some of it outputs a screen that someone has to write down. So he has to get information from the lab equipment too. And then finally, the RFC admins, they have a bunch of outputs they have to generate once they've agglomerated this data from Tom and John into one big, nice, clean data set. They've analyzed it. They're going to have to make public outputs. Those might be visualized dashboards that are interactive. Those might be technical outputs. Maybe they're going to make journal articles. There's a lot of different kind of outputs that the admins are going to generate, but they need clean, consistent, comparable, validated data that's not a mess. Any questions about this or thoughts? Does this sound familiar to anyone on the call?
Yes.
Good.
Yep.
Great. Awesome. That's what I like to hear. Okay, let's go do it. So now I'm going to show you Yeah, sure. We'll walk through this first. I think you get the basic idea. So like I just described the stack, which is you create organizations to help you manage control of data and data rights. You build surveys, and this is critical. And I know we've had, I don't know if Sarah's on the call, but we've had conversations with Sarah about people filling out surveys don't want to understand your entire plan. They have a job to do. They want to do it quickly. And if you're going to make them look at a spreadsheet with 8,000 entries and they only have 2 entries to put in, they're going to be confused, right? So you have to build your surveys for the people collecting the data, not for your data structure. It's really critical. Then we're going to collect the data. A little bit of some notes here. Hang on 1 second. So we're going to collect the data. It's going to be cross-platform. You can send emails to try to do that as efficiently as possible, meet people where they're at. Tracking results, having dashboards, not only for the public, but also internally for project managers like Jane. That's really critical and makes a big difference in terms of data quality so that the RFC admins aren't pissed off at the end of the year. And then finally, fix stuff. And this is something we added this year, which I'm excited about. No matter how well you do all the previous things, there shall be bad data. It is an inevitability of all such projects that bad data will sneak in. And once it's on the server, what do you do with it? In the new RSci app, there are admin controls for fixing that data. However, we've also implemented version control on everything. So you have version surveys, but you also have version data. So if an admin goes in and says, oh, you know what? John made a mistake. This value should have been 10, and they changed it to 9. We make a copy of the original so that if an auditor like Nori comes back and says, hey, how come this is 10? You say, oh, here's the original data. It actually was 9, but here's what happened. You know, John made a mistake. And then they can go, oh, okay, no problem. So we try to version everything that we can possibly version to make sure that auditability down the road is possible. And then finally, share stuff. So again, creating effective dashboards is not something we have in place, but I will show you a dashboard from the old app that gives you a sense of what you can do. Previously, we were focused on using JavaScript for dashboarding. And I think, and I would say this is tentative, but I think we're going to try really hard to allow people to just code directly in something like Jupyter, which would enable Python, R, Julia. And then iframe that in. We've got to meet people where they're at in terms of what type of coding is expected to do data cleaning and management. And I think that's going to be required. So that's the basic stack. So Manuel, this is where I'm going to need like fast fingers on your part, because I would do this relatively quickly myself, but we'll just do it as quick as we can. So if you could go to the PWA, just get out of here, because we're just going to go to dev.oursci.net.
You know what? I saw there's an option to allow you control.
Oh, really?
You want to try that?
It could break, but
I can only break.
You can try.
Did you get the request? Or it says here waiting for Greg to
Which Greg did you send it to? Because I'm on 2 devices.
Oh, you're
right
on
now.
2. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's add both. I sent it to the other.
Am I controlling you now?
Yep.
Oh, sweet. Wow, this is cool. Look at that.
Oh, just as, yeah, okay, cool.
Is that working? Cool. Oh, wait. Is this the dev? Oh, do I need to log in to see it?
Yes.
Okay, I got it. All right. Okay, so we're going to log in. So this is the new dev server. If you want to be able to play around here and just see some of the features, let us know. I don't know if we're going to open it up to the general public, but if you want to play around, let us know. Our target is by April 3rd to let people start to build surveys, and by April 10th to have those surveys be able to be sent out into the world. So again, these things are coming up fairly soon. Okay, so now we're logged in. First I'm going to show you the builder. And actually, I'm just going to show you a completed one. So these are all different surveys that we've built, just test surveys. But I'm going to show you this farm survey, which is somewhat similar to the farm data collection survey that we did last year. So you can see I can start a survey right here on the web and fill it out. So it's all web-based. If I was on iOS or Android, it would work the same. But also because I'm logged in, I can edit the survey, and I can also see the results. So let's edit and look at some of the features in here.
Just a sec.
Sure.
I need to allow
Right.
GPS. Okay.
Cool. So I'm just going to walk through this quick. So you have to follow me quickly because there's just tons of features in here that I think are relevant. So we can add a add a question down here. And of course, you have all your typical kind of survey questions like multiple choice and drop down and checkboxes of text. You also have a location question, which is the one that's up right here. But what I want to point out is that while you're creating your survey, you're also able to effectively test it. So you can create and use it at the same time. And this is critical because we're using scripts in here, and you have to be able to iterate quickly on this to be effective. So first, we're going to pick a location. You can make questions required so that users are unable to submit unless they click on that. And you can also make questions private. And that means that if someone who's not logged in or doesn't have admin rights within this organization sees this data, they will not see this particular result. They may see other things that aren't marked as private, but they won't see the location information. So let's go pick a park here. Then the next question is actually a script. So what this means is I can write a bit of JavaScript. I can access all of the questions before it, and I can do anything you can do in arbitrary JavaScript and then output the results to the user. So this particular bit of script goes to OpenLandMap using their LandGIS API to get historical weather and soil data from this particular location. I'm curious to see how it works. It is global, so I guess it should work for you, Manuel, but we shall see. And then it displays it in little cards. So you're going to see some fairly simplified outputs, but just recognize this is general JavaScript. You could make it look however you want. So let's give it a shot. Fingers crossed, Manuel, because I haven't done this on your computer and we were just working on this. So here you go. So here's your estimates from OpenLandMap at 3 different levels. So for some reason it doesn't work, but it's all coming from the same place. This is a good time to note, we're not trying to replicate what everybody else does. We're just trying to make it so that the user is having a single experience and that relevant data can go to the right places. Like obviously, LandPKS does this 100 times better than we're doing it here. But our goal is to get at least a little bit of information that we can then send to LandPKS, regardless of whether or not the project as a whole is using the LandPKS tool. So we feel that same kind of way about FarmOS and other services as well. If we can get little bits that are comparable and appropriately designed to send to other databases, we're excited about that. So, so there's that. So let's see what the next question is. We could get into a lot of detail about how these code panes work and all that stuff, but I think you get the idea. So now the farmer is going to put in their email. Again, this is required and also private. And then we're going to ask, hey, what'd you do this week? Did you irrigate or did you weed? And then we have some grouped questions. So if you clicked on irrigate, we actually have this neat little relevance expression, which allows you to say, hey, if the user selected irrigation, show them the questions in the irrigation group. If the user selected weeding, only show them the questions in the pesting control group. So this is the simplest possible bit of code you could use for this feature. It could be way more complex. It could be dependent on results from API calls. It could be dependent on multiple question types. There's a lot you can do here. The advantage of this, if you've ever created surveys, is instead of having 6 different surveys you have to maintain, you now have one survey that has a lot of dependencies in it, which means you're less likely to cause errors in version control, and you're able to better maintain how you're interacting with the various users that you're collecting data from. So now let's dive into this irrigation question. Let me scroll over here. We'll just move next because we can click through this at the same time. So put in my email. What's cool too is this shared code is actually showing you the raw version of the submission, which is getting updated in real time as you fill out an example form. So it literally is telling you exactly what your data is looking like. So when you're going and coding scripts, there's no guessing as to what you're trying to reference. It's right here. Okay, so I'm gonna do some irrigation. And now it's just gonna give me the irrigation group as I showed before. And so there's these options here. I can choose one or I can choose multiple. And then if I hit next, I get to the end and it shows me the information that I did. It shows checkboxes next to things that are correct. If there was a required question, it would show me an error code here. It would say that was required, you didn't fill it out. But let's look at these irrigation question. I think this is valuable and it connects to the plant data service. So the options that came up in the dropdown auto-populate, they were actually pulled in from a CSV. So we actually maintain a bunch of CSVs for crop types, disease types, and other information that we collected through the Real Food Campaign last year. And some of them have a lot of values, like 350, 400, 500 values, tillage classes, all that stuff. So you can upload the full CSV here, and then it'll populate this for your auto-populate dropdown. In the not so distant future, this will just link directly to a GitHub or GitLab CSV, so that every time you save this, it'll automatically sync with that original thing. And that's where we want to move. We want to move to a plant data service that is providing us with these values, that's correctly managing them, and that we're able to subset. And if they use tags and categorization, we can use the same sort of coding logic we used here to filter this down. So imagine this. I came into the RFC farm survey. The user said, hey, I'm a diversified veggie crop grower with under an acre. And they get down to the irrigation question. Do I really need to show them, boom sprinklers? Like, probably not, right? That's where people get overwhelmed and you get bad results. So I can use basic logic in JavaScript to filter these options down to exactly the options that that user needs. So that's something that'll happen in the future, as well as being able to use tags to filter options in a logical way based on the user type. So, so these are some of the examples in terms of survey creation and tools and components. And then let's go look at some of the submissions and what we can do on the, if you're an RFC like farm or a RFC manager, and you want to go look at the results. And this is all stuff that I'm just showing you a bunch of stuff that other very amazing, talented people did, like Andreas and Manuel and Will and Dan. So this is Andreas's work. It's really awesome. So this is calling the database. It's MongoDB. So it's really easy and flexible. You can see the data here in a bunch of different forms, both in the raw form, so you can copy paste out if you want, or you can see it in a table form. Just to give you a sense, because we're logged in as admin in oursci.net, we can see all the lat logs, right, from each of the submissions. If we were logged in as somebody else, you would not see these, because this was all private information. You would only see the ones that you submitted as a user. So again, there's that sort of privacy and group information. And then if you remember, we did that little call to API to get soil and weather information. Well, we actually saved, after we did a little bit of work on that call, we actually saved the information for the 0 and the 10 and the 30 centimeters for each of these to the database. And now, of course, it's like all searchable and easy. And then, of course, we also have saved the direct answers to the questions. So, what kind of irrigation did they do, and if they had a treatment value and all that kind of stuff. What kind of diseases were they trying to work on? So, okay, I love this. So let's imagine now we say, well, you know what? I want to make a dashboard where I'm really just looking at people who are doing a certain type of irrigation. Let's say surface drip, right? So I'm going to say, let's say, just look at surface drip irrigation, apply that. So now we filter the database down only to people who do surface drip, and we can continue to filter it down and say, we only want people who also do disease treatment, synthetic fungicides. So now we filtered it down to here. And you can continue to stack these filters. That's cool. But also, let's say you're going to be doing your data cleaning in a different program like R or Python, and you want to be able to pull in things effectively, right? You don't have to pull in 50 megabytes, all the data, when all you want to look at is these particular disease treatments. You want to tell the server, hey, only give me this data. Well, this filter generates the exact API call you need to make to get this exact data. So this basically, if you're familiar with Postman or something, this is kind of giving you a little bit of that functionality where you can figure out what you want here, and then you can copy paste this API into whatever programming language you're used to and make that call and get exactly what you want. So it really simplifies the analysis end of things too. I don't have time to show dashboards, but needless to say, you can create dashboards from this data in Python or R or JavaScript. Yeah, I just wanted to try to walk through as much as possible. There's a lot of new features and details. I guess the last thing that I missed, if you could go back to, and then I'm done. We'll have 15 minutes for questions. If you could go back to my submission. Oh, I control it, sorry. I want to show one more thing. So in terms of FarmOS integration, last year we did use OurSci surveys to push to FarmOS instances, and it worked pretty well, but it was painful to implement. This year, we're going to do it in a much, I think, simpler and again, more comparable and transferable way. So this pest and disease control group contains really all the information that's needed by FarmOS to know to create an observation, let's say, of a pest and disease control observation. So at the end of this group, we will auto-generate the FarmOS curl command to push data to FarmOS based on this. So it auto-generates the command to push to FarmOS. And then whoever the user is that's logged in and pushing the data, as long as they have a connected FarmOS account, it will push this data to their FarmOS account at the end of the survey. Why is that important? And why do we structure it that way? Because now let's say Doran says, hey, I want to create a survey, but I have a bunch of different questions, not these ones, but different ones. But I do want to make sure that our pest and disease control information is comparable and we're using it the same way so that we can pull it back out and ask interesting questions later. He can copy and paste this group into his survey and it will push to his FarmOS instance the exact same structure and type of information that we did. There's no additional code needed or information needed. You can copy paste this group and it'll just work. So it means that, you know, and we could apply the same logic to LandPKS and other applications so that we can really ensure that data being pushed and pulled from other services is done in a comparable way by having a library of these groups. So yeah, I guess that was like a lot of rambling, but it's a lot of details. So I'll just finish it and open up for questions.
Greg, can I show one more feature?
Please.
So I'm taking over for a moment. There's also one neat little thing where you can duplicate a group or a set of questions, and then it will just make a copy. And then you'll be able to, because we don't have for loops yet, but if you just like to collect a sequence of questions a couple of times, you can just use the clone feature and it will help you to get rid of situations where you have to do a lot of manual work.
Cool.
Greg, this is Steve from General Mills. Can you also show maybe how you mentioned you can go in and edit data? I'm assuming you can do that right in the dashboard you were showing before.
That's right.
Can you,
Exactly.
I mean, is it worth seeing, or is it basically like you can just kind of go in and change numbers as you see fit right in the dashboard?
Yeah, so our first implementation, and I don't, can I take, yeah, I can take back over. So let's go into the RFC one. Our first implementation of that will be a link, like let's say you want to edit this one. There would be a link here, and it would open this exact survey submission as if you were like filling out the survey. And then you could just go click through that survey and change the value and resave.
Oh,
Does that you see what I'm saying?
yeah, cool.
Yeah. That's the first implementation. Down the road, we know that it's better to just be able to literally like click here and be able to edit it directly in the spreadsheet. When you're doing like, when 30 things are wrong, you just want to do it quick.
Mm-hmm.
But that's down the road. But for now, you'll just literally reopen the survey, change it, and resubmit.
Okay. And how do you see the integration from, like, you know, all the users that were using it last year, kind of transferring over stuff to the new platform, or you know, I've been sort of like manually cleaning CSVs and stuff. So,
Yep.
like, is there any sort of integration or something that we could do?
I think, so what we told everybody is we will, you know, for free, like support anybody who was on the old platform who needs to recreate surveys on this one. So Dan will help you do that.
Okay, cool.
Or I will, yeah. And then if you need to pull data in, like let's say you had data from last year you want to pull in to make comparable this year, the simplest way to do it is to get it all clean, put it in a CSV, and actually just save that CSV in the dashboard. That's the easiest way to pull it in, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. And that's what we did actually with the RFC data, some from last year. So.
Greg, this is Dan Kane. This is really cool to see, especially as someone who's, you know, was a heavy user of OurSci via Quick Carbon. This is really cool to see sort of what the admin view was, but thinking back to that diagram you had of RFC with the different kinds of users, subgroups who are maybe interacting with the same observations, but from, you know, different perspectives. So say an observation is a soil sample. One person is responsible for collecting that metadata in the field. One person is in the lab responsible for processing that. I'm curious, is that sort of structure in the way you alluded to it? Basically, the admin can sort of initiate a project and have and sort of control a couple different surveys, but different users are interacting with different surveys to submit different types of information about the same observations. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. You know, I think it's really dependent because of this flexibility. Like every group ends up designing their thing differently. But I mean, usually things are connected by sample ID. So you've got, you know, two different surveys where you really need to keep the sample ID connected. What's nice about the scripting and everything, and we and Dan, I don't know if he's on the call, but he can talk about the Real Food Campaign last year, is now in the lab, and we do this in our lab now. We get a sample ID, you know, 1050. When it gets checked in, we run a little script that says, hey, did somebody submit sample ID 1050 from the field group yet? And if the answer is no, then we need to email that person, right? We need to like email someone and be like, hey, like there's no sample 1050 from the field group. We just received in the lab, what's going on? And I think Dan was saying that originally we had 90% sample IDs in the lab connected with field surveys. And we ended up getting that up to 98% by the end of the year because we were able to directly follow up and identify at the point of intake into the lab that those field surveys were missing.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that explanation.
Sure.
Hey, Greg, this is Paul from FarmOS. I had a question kind of about the aggregator implementation. I was curious of how much of that is configurable in the survey side of things.
Andreas or Manuel, do you want to walk through the basic implementation for us for Aggregator?
Yeah, sure. So, Paul, our first idea was that we would have per application, or let's say like per server instance of the OurSci survey stack, a single instance for an aggregator. We're going to use for April, May, and onwards, just as like a first solution, where we would help people to access their FarmOS instance and then authenticate requests using server-side calls. And then as an admin, I would be able to assign instances to a user.
Ah, okay, cool.
So it's not yet finalized if we are going to also allow for every single organization to have their own FarmOS aggregator instance, which probably would be the best idea also in terms of security, but that's not finalized yet. And the FarmOS integration, it's very much ongoing. So in the next week, I'm going to be working on this, and probably I'm going to get back to you guys in terms of how we access things.
Cool. And I imagine, like, here's probably a good use case would be in the survey, you might want to define what kind of a log you want to create and all those different parameters, like the observation log that Greg was mentioning.
Exactly.
Those are the kind of things that you're still building out?
Yeah. Yeah,
cool.
Yes. So the main idea is that you would have, because there's like some things where you can't do it very in a composable way. And the thing is, you will need to reference a field or a planting. So there will be a question type that will be directly linked to FarmOS, and that's going to be one for it's basically a drop-down picker for the field, and then a second one if you want to reference a planting, a drop-down picker for a planting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Greg. I was wondering if you might just pull up the timeline screen again before we close out. And I had one more question just to clarify. I mean, I think you covered the capability to support this, but just to maybe just mention how this approach in Form Builder can also be used to support step-by-step in-lab and field-based methods that may have, say, multimedia supports. I'm just particularly for the sort of, we have, similar to Land PKS, but where we can add additional field methodologies to the process.
Yeah.
Are you thinking this screen?
Or were you thinking the one with all the green things on it?
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah, I was just before you close out, I thought that would be a good thing for us to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll do next steps and then talk about that specific piece. So April 3rd, people will be able to build their surveys. April 10th, they'll be able to send those surveys out. We won't have the FarmOS integration complete by April 10th, but we'll be able to retroactively apply the code to push to FarmOS by May 1st. So basically you can, like through the Real Food Campaign, we'll be able to send the surveys out, and then come May 1st, we'll just push a button on each of those surveys to actually send it to FarmOS at that point. So that's our target. In terms of using more robust descriptions, you can have you can create screens which are not questions, but just information screens. And Manuel, you can give me the date, but that will be markdown capable with images, embeddable images. I think, is that May 1st? I'm not sure when we were reading.
So the thing is like external resources. So you will be for certain able to use this when you're online. We'll need to figure out how we can, and that's a technicality, how we can make sure things are appropriately pre-cached, especially images, for when you're in the field, and if they're not on the OurSci service tech servers. So if they're like somewhere outside, we need to figure out how we can pin resources. But yeah, like one of our goals is for April 10 to have at least the ability to have questions which allow you, or basically just like an informational screen for inside your survey that has formatted output or.
Right. And we have these same needs in the lab too, just to note. And a really typical case that we get feedback on all the time is, you know, I'm a lab user, I'm a lab manager, I create my entire SOP within an OurSci survey, right? Which is what you want. You don't have to build it 3 times. But as I'm on my 100th time measuring this thing or running this sample, I don't really want to have to click through the directions every time, right? I want the directions to be there, but I want to be able to turn them off. So, you know, we'll have the ability to turn off essentially non-essential questions so that once you've gotten good at something, you don't have to look at the SOP every single time. So yeah, we are focused on not just questions and question types, but also an effective information flow.
Hey, Greg, can I say something here too? This is Will from RSci. Also, like, technically, there's no limitation in terms of like what that content would be. It's so like in the future supporting a video, there's no like technical hurdle to putting a video in there for like instructions or something like that. When you use the word multimedia, I believe, Dorn. The only issue is, so we've talked about this in this presentation as a web-based collection platform, but it's a progressive web app, so it can be installed and operated offline. And so the only issue with performing some of these actions would be caching the assets. So like if you wanted to have something only available to online users that was stored elsewhere on the internet, that would be fine. There's no problem with that. It's just we want to make sure that users aren't, you know, getting out to the field, losing internet connection, and not able to view the instructions.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for clarifying that. I understood that was part of the plan. I just wanted to make sure that came clear.
Yeah, and can one more like quick note too is, if you know this year this back end will, or the server components will be the back end for Quick Carbon as we develop it out in the future. So that's one of the primary uses, and then also the Real Food Campaign and obviously General Mills. Steve, if there's other people on the call who are interested in using it this year, it's better to let us know sooner rather than later, so we can really integrate your use case to make sure we're prioritizing those things and we have them on our roadmap. So please just like get a hold of us if you feel like this is a good fit for anything you're doing.
Well, thanks so much, Greg, for giving that overview. I think it's really timely, and look forward to following up in the coming weeks with all of the intersection with the other Open Team roadmaps. So thanks, everybody, and let's thank Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank
you, Greg.
Here, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.